This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Free at last, over 300 kidnapped Nigerian schoolboys have been rescued. Nigeria says it expects to receive coronavirus vaccines in January 2021. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has appealed to rich nations to support the UN-backed COVAX program. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live, wherever you're joining us. I'm Mahia Mutua live in Nairobi. Ramanyang joins me now with your business headlines.
That's right, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Traders and manufacturers are welcoming Nigeria's decision to reopen her land borders to trade. And the UK Prime Minister is asking the EU to break the deadlock over fisheries access in the ongoing Brexit trade talks. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Mahia.
Rama, thank you. We begin in Nigeria, where more than 300 schoolboys kidnapped by militants last week have been released. They have arrived in Katsina State, where officials say they will undergo physical checks before reuniting with their families. The boys, dressed in dusty clothes and some in light green uniforms, looked weary but otherwise well. According to local authorities, 344 students were rescued by security forces in an operation on Thursday.
They hid us all in the same place when they took us at first, but when they saw a jet fighter, they changed the location and hid us in a different place. They gave us food, but it was very little.
Well, the Katsina State Governor also took time to thank security forces for their efforts.
I also use this opportunity to praise and thank the efforts made by the entire security apparatus of the state, of the country, for what they did, the professionalism that was shown and demonstrated during the efforts that culminated in the release of these 344 students of Kankala Government Science Secondary School.
The Ethiopian government has announced it'll offer about $250,000 reward for those who would disclose the whereabouts of TPLF leadership. Here is CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
The officials of the Ethiopian National Defense Force say the announcement of the more than $250,000 reward was made to expedite the work of hunting down TPLF top officials and bring them into justice sooner than later. It was said, though the government first disclosed it was closing in on the TPLF's main leadership's location, later the army could not achieve its plan of arresting them. This is because the whereabouts of the people is not yet known. That is why the National Defense Force have now put the 10 million Ethiopian birr prize for anyone who would provide information which would assist the force to apprehend the people needed for several acts of crime. On the other hand, the Tigray regional state has enjoyed yet another week of relative peace, and life is returning to normalcy in different towns under the provisional administration. Grumtara, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has appealed to rich nations to support the UN-backed COVAX program. The program aims to ensure the entire world has access to COVID-19 vaccines. He stressed broad immunization is in the interest of all countries.
We need to be able to make a vaccine available to everybody, everywhere, and affordable by everybody, everywhere.
The Secretary General made the remark in Berlin after a meeting with German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas. Gutierrez said COVAX needs $5 billion through the end of January. Overall, the program faces a shortfall of more than $20 billion. Guterres also asked the rich countries to refrain from hoarding. Many have bought more doses than the volume of their population. Back to Nigeria, the country expects to receive COVID-19 vaccines by the end of January 2021. Health Minister Osagie Ehanire says a technical team will decide which vaccine best suits the country's needs. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on that story.
With the rest of the world scrambling to get the COVID-19 vaccine, Nigeria does not want to be left behind. The government expects to get its first batch of vaccines before the end of next month. But the health minister warns that the logistics of procuring and storing the vaccines will be quite challenging.
There are two types of vaccines, as you have heard. There are those that have to be in ultra deep freezers, the mRNA type of vaccine, freezers that must give you at least minus 80 degrees. There's another type that can be a deep freezer of minus 20, and there's another type that can be in a refrigerator of 2 degrees, which is a regular refrigerator. Now, the one that's a regular refrigerator is easy in that you can just put in where many of such regular refrigerators all over our country. Minus 20 will also be possible because we have freezers, what we call freezers. But the ultra cold freezers, we hardly have any in our country. Therefore, to receive and store those ultra cold vaccines will require that we go and purchase and procure those ultra deep freezers.
Some experts say the target of getting the vaccine to Nigeria by January might be too ambitious, given that there's still not enough at the moment to go round. But the government says it has signed up with the WHO and Vaccine Alliance Gavi to access the jab.
We're also having bilateral discussions, talking with manufacturers. Some of them have written to us, want to have talks with us, and I think one of them was, as I speak to you, is already having a discussion in the Ministry of Health. The ones that the British and the Russian teams are teaming up to put together. We're working with them because if we cannot get enough from one source, we should be able to get from other sources.
But for many health experts here, getting the logistics right is what worries them most. The vaccines are expected at a time when there have been stories circulating about their efficacy, even here in Nigeria. So as the authorities prepare to receive the vaccines, they'll also have to strongly campaign against the conspiracy theories, which could take religious and cultural dimensions here. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, on Wednesday, the Egyptian government announced measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. This comes as Egypt officially enters the second wave of the pandemic. Here is CGTN's Adel Mahroui with more details.
After meeting with the High Committee for Managing the COVID-19 pandemic, the Egyptian Prime Minister's office announced regulations to help curb the second wave of the pandemic. 9 measures will be in place. The government will continue to ban mass gatherings like weddings, funeral services, or private tutoring in closed areas.
The government's announced that it's tightening measures regarding the application of previous guidelines. Those who violate their personal preventative measures will face immediate fines. That reflects the government's approach to rely more on preventative measures rather than waiting until infections spread.
Egypt will allocate $64 million for its COVID-19 efforts for the next few months. The government will alternate between employees working at home to maintain the least capacity in public services facilities. And partial lockdowns for retail stores will continue from midnight to 6 in the morning.
Egypt did not resort to a full lockdown in the first wave and is not expected to do so in the second wave. Since the start, Egypt has been trying to give priority to the population's health while keeping a balance for economic activity.
Egypt has also kept the door open to announce additional measures in the coming weeks, depending on how the second wave progresses.
With the holiday season approaching, we're expecting additional measures to be taken to guide and limit how people will mark the festive season. The government is resorting to preemptive measures, which should prevent a worse infection rate from happening.
The government is currently financing a national plan to acquire and distribute COVID-19 vaccines. So far, it has received 50,000 doses of China's Sinopharm vaccine and might get 450,000 in the next few weeks and more from other manufacturers. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have imposed a countrywide curfew to curb the spread of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Central African nation has recorded more than 14,000 cases of the coronavirus since March this year. Many locals in the capital, Kinshasa, have criticized the new directive. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa now reports.
The DRC has recorded a spike in COVID-19 cases over the past 2 months. More than 300 cases were recorded this Wednesday. The Health Ministry has consequently imposed a curfew to stop the spread of the disease. The curfew will start at 9 p.m. and end at 5 a.m. the following day. Entrepreneurs like Mifi Makabu, who runs this bar and restaurant in Kinshasa, fear the move may push them out of business.
Many of our customers start coming here at around 9 p.m. That curfew will really affect my business. The government should reconsider it because many of us will be forced to close our businesses.
The government has also banned meetings of more than 10 people and ordered the compulsory wearing of masks in public.
Many people living along this road that leads to Kinshasa's airport will find it difficult to beat the curfew at 9 p.m. This area has one of the worst traffic jams in the whole city.
Many residents of Kinshasa have criticized the new measures.
My biggest worry about these new COVID-19 measures is how they will be enforced. Our police force is very unprofessional. Many officers will use the curfew to harass and extort money from us. The government should train them to do their job professionally.
The government should extend that curfew. I live so far from my workplace and usually return home late. I just don't know how I will manage.
The government says the number of patients with COVID-19 is higher than those recorded in the first wave of the pandemic. The Health Ministry has recorded more than 14,000 cases since March this year. The disease has now spread to 22 provinces across the country. The police will begin cracking down on people who violate the new regulations on Friday. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen says once the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is approved, member states will begin vaccinations at the same time. That's on December the 27th. Ryan Thompson has more from Frankfurt.
Well, frontline workers and some of Europe's most vulnerable people will get a Christmas gift that they have been waiting months for. The first jabs of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine will be rolled out across the European Union just 2 days after the holiday. This date is no accident. The EU chief Ursula von der Leyen has made a point for the bloc and its member states to be united in confronting the pandemic. Hence, the 27 EU member states will all start vaccinating the same day on the 27th of December. Von der Leyen has received support from national leaders, not least from Berlin and Paris. Here in Germany, the health minister has been eager to start giving jabs since the UK approved the vaccine. He put pressure on Brussels to speed up the approval process, which was originally scheduled for the last few days of the month. The Chancellor, Angela Merkel, met with the German-Turkish vaccine developers earlier to congratulate them, and she discussed the vaccine's rollout here in Germany.
If we look at how many people are dying of coronavirus now, we know how many people this vaccine can save. And so, of course, Germany is looking forward to the day we can start vaccinating people once the European Medicines Agency gives its approval.
And public confidence in the European Medicines Agency has been so important to Brussels and the many member states throughout this process. They do not want questions about whether the vaccine is safe or has been rushed for political purposes. Of course, for the EU's so-called vaccination days to go ahead, the jab needs to get the green light from regulators. But after already passing checks in the US and UK, it's expected to move forward. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You're watching Africa Live here on CGTN. Here's what's coming up after this short break. Chinese leaders have held their annual meeting to chart the economy for the coming year. And on International Migrants Day, we highlight the plight of migrants on the African continent.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography. and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Argan, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
No one again, he can holding guns.
Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back. Now, Chinese leaders have held their annual meeting to chart the economy for the coming year. At the Central Economic Work Conference, they committed to a new development strategy. Looking back, the meeting said China was the only major economy to see positive economic growth in 2020 amid complex international situation and COVID-19 impact. There were also successes in poverty eradication, reform, and scientific innovation. The meeting agreed to pursue a dual circulation economy, focusing more on domestic demand as the main driver of development, with additional input coming from international trade. The meeting backed ongoing supply-side reforms to create a better balance between demand and supply. To achieve this, the meeting called for a series of tasks to be carried out next year. They include strengthening national strategic technologies and formulating an action plan to reach a peak of carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. They also include building more independent and controllable industrial chains and supply chains, expanding domestic demand, and continuing reform and opening up. The meeting also urged continued vigilance in coronavirus prevention and control. Gao An tells us more.
A roadmap for economic development. For 2021, China aims to continue promoting technology innovation and building a stronger domestic market while stabilizing the financial sector. It's all part of what the government calls high-quality development, which is detailed in China's 14th five-year plan. It also aims to enhance the capability of industrial and supply chains to be independent and controllable.
So China will shift more on the keyword, which is controllability, with its own fate, by which we need to focus more on those fundamental technologies that is able to reduce reliance on global supply.
Besides tech innovation, China plans to focus on ensuring food security, achieving carbon neutrality, preventing disorderly expansion of capital, and promoting economic reforms. Also high on the agenda is boosting domestic consumption. Professor Liu explains how this could be achieved.
More job opportunities and more opportunities for entrepreneurship, more business opportunities for the employers because they are there to decide on the salary level. Then also to provide better social security program so that people can be alleviated of the uncertainties so that they are able to empty their pockets to buy more.
Officials say China is still in an important period of strategic opportunity. They say the country needs to take its chances and speed up economic transformation. China's economy may face more complexities in the coming year brought by COVID-19 and an unstable world. So the government has prepared multiple policies to keep the economy both resilient and robust. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, today marks International Migrant Day, observed to highlight the difficulties and contributions of migrants all over the world. According to Global Migration Data Portal, the number of international migrants worldwide reached 272 million in 2019. Female migrants make up 48% of that. 3 out of 4 international migrants are of working age, or that is between 20 and 64 years of age. Over 160 million are migrant workers. The United Nations says there are an estimated 33 million migrant children, up from 24 million during 1990 to the year 2000. Now, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, thousands of African migrants continue their attempts to reach Europe. Libya remains a popular transit point. There, smugglers take migrants across the dangerous Mediterranean crossing. On the Libyan shore, the migrants face poor living conditions in detention centers. Astatal has more.
Abdul Razak Yassin, like other immigrants in this detention center, has dreams of reaching Europe. He left Somalia after his father was killed. Tired of the insecurity, he set off on a long journey across Ethiopia and Sudan.
I took a regular taxi to the borders with Ethiopia. Me and 11 others, all Somalis. From Ethiopia, smugglers take us one at a time. They take an individual to each city. We went to the capital Addis Ababa in Ethiopia and were there for around 2 weeks.
When he reached the Libyan desert region of Kufra, he was detained by smugglers. There, they demanded more money from him, turning to physical violence.
They use a WhatsApp group to contact our families in Somalia and take videos of every Somali who doesn't have the money to pay. The smugglers beat you and put a rock on your head and say in the video, "Transfer the money," and my mom can see and hear this. But we don't have anything here. We only had a house in the capital, so there's nowhere else I can get the money. The guys here tell me to transfer the money, but I don't have any. It's just the house with 4 rooms and bedrooms, and I sold it.
Now he finds himself in this detention center. He knows of the dangers, with 4 of his friends dying during the crossing, but it hasn't deterred his dream of reaching Europe.
I want to go to Europe. There is no other way for us Somalians. I'll go.
Abdul doesn't focus on the daunting figures of over 1,000 migrants drowning during the Mediterranean crossing in 2020 alone. Instead, he notes several of his friends have reached Europe, and he is determined to join them. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, we earlier spoke to Yvonne Dege, who is the spokesperson for the UN's International Organization for Migration. She began by listing the challenges that migrants face and how these issues can be resolved.
We have sadly lost the lives of migrants in 2 tragic incidents that took place off the coast of Djibouti, in which migrants were killed by smugglers when they were trying to leave, trying to get to another country, and found that the borders were closed. And everyone knows, of course, air, land and sea borders have been closed in many, many places, hundreds of them in the eastern horn of Africa. As a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've also seen migrants stranded in their tens of thousands, unable to get to destinations they seek to reach, but also unable to return home. As a consequence of the fact that many of these migrants take irregular routes to try and reach these countries, we also have the now phenomenon of missing migrants, people who have simply disappeared, vulnerable groups to have been impacted during this COVID-19 pandemic. And what we at IOM, the International Organization for Migration, have seen is that migrants are being excluded. migrants are being left out in some of the responses from governments to the crisis, to the pandemic crisis. And when I say that, what I mean is a lack of access to, for instance, personal protective equipment. Of course, migrants, many of them find themselves in situations where they're unable to social distance. They may be living in informal and overcrowded settings, which everybody knows is an environment and a condition in which the disease spreads. What IOM, the International Organization for Migration, are calling for is for governments in the region who we work with to include migrants, first of all, in any health response to the disease, to ensure that migrants have access to the same public services and health services that ordinary citizens have. And of course, with the recent development of approved vaccines, of course, the inclusion of migrants in terms of access to any vaccine.
Now, Tunisian authorities have launched a national platform to support women called the 50 Million African Women Speak platform. The initiative was financed through a grant of $12.4 million from the African Development Bank. Adnan Shawashi has the details.
The objective of the platform, womenconnect.org, is to contribute to the economic empowerment of women by ensuring access to information on financial and non-financial services, as well as facilitating the creation and management of businesses.
This African digital platform was initiated during the World Summit on Gender, organized in 2019 in the Rwandan capital. Since then, 38 countries from COMESA have joined the initiative. 14 countries have already launched their national platforms. Tunisia is the 15th. This project is dedicated to business women as well as women entrepreneurs across Africa.
The Tunisian government plans to empower women through projects aimed at promoting entrepreneurship and boosting inclusive and sustainable economic growth.
Among these projects is the RADA program, launched in 2016 for the development of female entrepreneurship, and which has generated over 4,500 projects throughout the country. This platform will reinforce our national effort to boost the economic empowerment of women.
The Director General of the Regional Office of the African Development Bank noted that women entrepreneurs in Africa represent 35% of the segment, while this rate is only 20% in Tunisia. The 50 Million African Women Speak platform, which targets 50 million women entrepreneurs, contains detailed information on starting, managing and expanding a business. According to the Ministry of Women's Affairs and the African Development Bank, women entrepreneurs in Africa and the world are the most vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19, as they continue to face obstacles such as limited access to finance and markets that hold back their economic activities. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, a group of young men in Kenya have taken up a career that few would voluntarily do so. The men formed a group called the Cheploch Divers in Elgeyo Marakwet County 12 years ago. They dive into a deep gorge in Kenya's Rift Valley, risking both lives and limbs in the process. The spectacular but scary undertaking has fascinated tourists and locals for many years. CGTN's Nick Mudimba now reports.
Deep diving has for many years only been performed by well-trained personnel, such as those in the Navy, to minimize risks as people plunge into the water. But in Kenya's Elgeyo Marakwet County, locals have perfected the art despite doing so in a dangerous landscape where any small mistake could see them hit rocks and lose their lives. These men are known as the Cheploch Divers. They regularly dive into this gorge near the Kerio River that is quite deep and has crocodiles living inside. They do this largely to entertain local and international tourists, and this helps them earn an income in the process.
Basically what we do here is entertainment for those tourists who visit this area. They make stopovers because it's a tourist attraction site. We also act as guides. We direct and guide those who come here.
But on several occasions in the past, they have also helped save lives of people or helped retrieve bodies of people and even vehicles that fell into the water. Any miscalculation as they take the risky plunge could mean death. But they've always seemed to maintain their cool and wow crowds in the process. Curious spectators gather as the boys propel themselves into the river from elevated positions. Many of them are perplexed by the stunts.
Well, the place is beautiful, but it's scary how these boys are doing. Yeah, what I've seen, I think it's about talent or what, because I don't think a normal human being can be doing that. It's just, I think it's a talent.
You're going to say, I'm not going to do this thing. I'm not going to do this thing. Where are you going to get the food? And you have to eat daily, breakfast, lunch, and supper.
2 of the members died at work, but those tragedies never dampened their spirits. They have no special underwater gear. For Philip Kimbo, who is the team leader, diving has helped transform his life.
I needed help to study in the university, and through this diving, I was able to raise my school fees, and I finally cleared my education, and I will be graduating next year.
Although they have not undergone any formal training, these divers have mastered what they do. Many of them have even been absorbed in the Kenyan Navy and other security forces across Kenya. The audacity and courage to jump into deep crocodile-infested waters is out of this world. But for them, the main agenda is actually putting food on the table. Some of them have paid school fees, fed their families through this risky venture. But one day they hope that indeed they'll get something stable to actually steer their lifestyles. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Elgeyo Marakwet County, Kenya.
Well, it's now time for the latest in business. Rama's back with the latest.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in business news. Traders and manufacturers are welcoming Nigeria's decision to reopen trade across her land borders. And the UK Prime Minister is asking the EU to break the deadlock in Brexit trade talks, essentially over fisheries.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Banks in Sudan have started to re-establish trade ties with foreign banks following the country's removal from the United States list of state sponsors of terror. That listing had blocked Sudanese banks from setting up correspondent banking relationships, especially those that involved either the US dollar or other major currencies like the pound sterling or the euro for nearly 2 decades. Lenders have been relying mainly on the United Arab Emirates dirham for international transactions. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
As Sudan reopens its economy to the world following years of economic sanctions, restoring international banking links could provide a vital boost to an economy still in crisis more than 18 months into a political transition following the overthrow of former President Omar al-Bashir. Less than 2 months ago, Bahrain-headquartered Al-Baraka Bank carried out the first dollar transaction in Sudan in nearly 2 decades.
We conclude a very good transaction whereby Bank al-Baraka Sudan will take the lead for the export of Sudan and certain, because in the past, most of the gold, especially the gold and agriculture exports outside Sudan, is the government, they take it, and they do all the necessary action for it. But now it has been, gradually taken to the private sector. And there is a very good move now whereby Al-Baraka Bank Sudan is getting involved in both export and the imports, and the foreign currencies is more or less is handled by Al-Baraka Sudan.
Al Baraka Bank, which has been in Sudan for 30 years, continued to operate despite the international embargo and currently has 28 branches in the country. The bank's CEO says Egyptian banks should be more focused on the African continent.
I believe personally that Egypt has a very good market, which is just close to their borders. All these African countries, you know, they have a lot of exports. Egypt can get it as a transit to the international markets. I believe that there is a lot of potential in Sudan, especially in the agriculture sector, industrial, and commercial.
But what does it take for the Sudanese financial sector to keep up with these ambitious plans?
Banking sector still, you know, has developed. And if I compare Sudan 30 years back, they have a very good structure. They have a very good people. They have very good lawyers. The system, it needs just, you know, to be upgraded to enable them to reach to the level of the banks which is close to them in their own territories, like, for example, to Egypt or to Saudi Arabia or to the other, because I'm sure that they will not be able to apply the international standards immediately.
Although bankers and analysts say the process to re-establish relations with foreign banks will likely be slow, Al Baraka Bank's head is optimistic the North African country's financial sector will flourish in the near future. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's step away from the continent for a moment now. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is calling on Brussels to make a final offer on access to British fishing waters in order to break a deadlock in trade talks between the two sides. His remarks came as the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said that the trade and security talks were entering the final hours. The two sides are still at loggerheads over whether or not the EU will be able to impose tariffs on British goods. Now that should be the case, should be the case if the UK decides to close its seas to European vessels after a new transition period of unspecified length with less than 2 weeks to go for the end of the current transition period. The UK left the EU at the end of January and it will leave the EU single market at midnight on the 31st of December or without a follow-on accord.
It's the moment of truth. We have very little time remaining, just a few hours, to work through these negotiations in a useful fashion if we want this agreement to enter into force on the 1st of January. As you were informed by our President Ursula von der Leyen a few days ago here in this very room, there is a chance of getting an agreement, but the path to such an agreement is very narrow.
Now, vaccine optimism has been a bit of a theme in our business coverage, and this next story is pretty much all about it. A gauge of confidence among British consumers jumped by the most in 8 years in December. Now, that rise was boosted by the launch of the country's coronavirus vaccine program. The Consumer Confidence Index, done by the market research firm GfK, rose to -26 from -33 in November. Now, that increase took the index to its highest level since September. In the meantime, the Bank of England says that the UK's economy is likely to contract by just over 1% in the fourth quarter of the year. That forecast is less than its forecast of a 2% contraction made back in November. Back to the continent now. Tunisia has announced plans to establish a business plan to support its national carrier amidst the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As of December 2020, Tunisair has seen a 70% year-on-year decline in passenger traffic compared to last year. The government's plan for the national carrier includes the acquisition of additional A320neo aircraft from Airbus while retiring a number of its aged planes and overhauling the route network based on profitability. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Tunisia's finance ministry is carrying out an in-depth audit of its national carrier Tunisair. According to the latest financial statements of Tunisair, the company revenues plunged 67% in the first 3 quarters of 2020 to $163 million against $500 million at the end of September 2019. Likewise, passenger numbers fell 68% and the tonnage of freight and mail followed suit, as it plummeted by 58% to 2,322 tons as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Tunisair has been facing difficulties even before the COVID-19 crisis. which impacted its performance, image abroad, and international rank. Only 11 planes are functional out of 24. The cost of maintenance is very high, while the planes are grounded. Structural reforms are needed urgently. Parliament is overseeing this large-scale operation.
Analysts explained that with over 8,000 employees, Tunisair has one of the highest number of permanent staff in the airline industry. Some recent studies concluded that the national carrier must lay off at least 3,500 people in the next 5 years to sustain its business.
Layoffs are necessary, as well as the reduction of salaries and the number of offices abroad to limit costs. For example, just in France, Tunisair has more than 57 offices. The cost is too high for an airline company. Cutting costs and remaining operational with the minimum staff amid the COVID-led economic downturn is the only way out of the crisis.
The syndicates of the national carrier urged the government to appoint a permanent CEO who can streamline operations and enhance growth of the airline. The public prosecutor arrested 7 senior Tunisair officials in July 2020 following a complaint about suspicions of abuse and financial corruption at Tunisair Technics.
Arresting our colleague and firing the former CEO and appointing a temporary head of the company is a suspicious decision. The new appointee needs at least 2 years to get acquainted with the situation in Tunisair. We need a competent manager who has a plan to save the company from bankruptcy and avoid layoffs.
Tunisian authorities assert that the financial situation of Tunisair is disastrous, as its debts amount to millions of dollars. Industry experts emphasize the need to improve the performance of the company through the implementation of a structural reform plan. The Ministry of Transport and Logistics plans to develop the air cargo service. Authorities will launch Tunisair cargo services in the next 2 years in order to provide additional resources to this state-owned company. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour. In global business, we'll be heading over to Zambia. The government over there has unveiled an economic recovery plan. But how does it deal with the debt service problems that saw the country become the first African sovereign default amidst this pandemic? We'll explore that and plenty more at 1800 GMT. Time for a short break. Mahia will be back with more news in just a moment. Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The year 2020. It was a year like none before, shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic. Africa, seemingly spared the worst of it, still took a huge hit with unprecedented disruptions to healthcare, the social and economic order. Climate change also took its toll on Africa. Shifts in temperature affected food productivity and availability of water, and the overall security of the African people. The continent saw major political changes too. Several countries held successful elections despite the pandemic, while others made strides towards lasting peace. This was 2020, a year unique in so many ways. CGTN will highlight some of the top stories we covered as the year unfolded.
Invasion in several parts of the country.
Welcome back. Let's turn to our Made in Africa series known as Liquid Gold. Morocco produces what many believe to be the best argan oil in the world. For centuries, argan oil has been used for culinary purposes and as a beauty aid. The amber-hued oil is produced by a number of cooperatives in Morocco, helping to empower rural women.
درنا أرغان على أساس هو الشجرة اللي كتواجد عندنا في المنطقة يعني المنتوج اللي عندنا في المنطقه هو الارغان. ما كاينش شي حاجه اخرى تقريبا اللي يخدموا فيها العيالات من غير الارغان. على اساس انه العيالات كانوا كيخدموا غير في ديورهم، ويعني كل وحده كتخدم في دارها. فكرنا قلنا علاش لا ما نديروش شي مقر اللي يجمعنا كاملين، حيت كانوا كيخدموا بحال شكل ديال التويزه اللي كانوا كيخدموا بها شحال هذا. وفكرنا باش ندير واحد المشروع ديال موديل للداخل ديال التعاونيه اللي نتجمعوا فيه، منها نحافظوا على الموروث ديالنا. لطيفة يتعبو رئيسة التعاونية الفلاحية النسوية تيريزيت لإنتاج وتسويق زيت الأرغان ومشتقاته. يعني تفضلوا معنا، مرحبا بكم باش نوريكم الخطوات والمراحل اللي كيدوزوا فيه زيت الأرغان. مرحبا بكم تفضلوا معنا. حتى 2013 عاد درنا واحد الجروب اللي فيه 8 ديال لي كوبيراتيف اللي كنحاولوا نتجمعوا فيه يعني ونقلبوا على الحلول ديال المشاكل اللي كاينين عندنا كاملين. وبالتالي يعني الا جينا نقولوا المهم بحال الا كنتي بوحدك، بحال الا كنتي مع اتحاد، ولكن اتحاد قوه. تقريبا 30 مستفيده اللي كاينه، وكل وحده كتخدم في ليطاب ديال الارغان، يعني اللي هو مبني بشراكه ما بين الجماعه والمبادره الوطنيه للتنميه البشريه. ولاو العيالات كيف ما قلنا في الاول انهم عندهم واحد البلاصه اللي كتجمعهم، كاين ينتجوا زيت الارغان، كنحاولوا نقلبوا على الاسواق وعلى المعارض، وبالتالي يعني داك الربح تيرجع للعيالات كيعاونوا به وليداتهم المصاريف اليوميه ديالهم، وحنا عايشين الحمد لله. هذه المرحله الاولى كيحيدوا فيها القشره الارغان، يعني كتسمى مرحله ديال التقشير. هذه المرحله الاولى ديال التقشير. هذه المرحله الثانيه ديال التهراس. هذه المرحله ديال التحميص. الا بغيناه باش يكون عندنا الارغان اليمونتير كنحاولوا نديروا التحميص عن طريق لا ماشين اللي كدير كدور، يكون فيها الزنين اللي هو اليمونتير. المرحله الاخرى كنخدموا الارغان ديال الكوسميتيك اللي كنديروا الزنين في هذا البوق ديال لا ماشين، وبالتالي كيخرج لنا زيت ارغان. هذا كيتسمى ارغان ديال الماكله، ارغان اليمونتير ارتيزان، يعني بطريقه تقليديه. ملي كنديروا الطريقه ديال العصير كنمشيو للتعمار. هنا تنديروا فيه تيكتاج وكنعمروا فيه القراعي. هنا كاين البرودوي فيني. بالنسبه للارغان يعني ليه مطالب كثيره، بحيث انه لقاو فيه عده منافع بالنسبه للانسان، بحال الاوميغا 3 اوميغا 9، يعني اللي هو واحد سميتو اللي هي مفيده للصحه. كذلك بالنسبه للتجميل راه كيخرجوا به دابا لي كريم لي شامبوان، بزاف ديال الحوايج اللي كيستافدوا بها سواء بالنسبه للرجال ولا بالنسبه للنساء، يعني مطلوب بزاف. ما بقاوش كاع الناس ديال المنطقه كيستافدوا بها ولا الناس اللي هما ديالهم، بحيث انه كيتصدر لبرا. بالنسبه للكوسميتيك كيمشي حتى ل 600 درهم تقريبا اللتر. بالنسبه للاليمونتير 250 300. ولكن في ظل التكوينات والتحسيس اللي كانوا يتلقاوها العيالات داخل التعاونيه استطاعوا انهم يفرضوا الوجود ديالهم وفرضوا كذلك الطاقه ديالهم والذات ديالهم في ذاك المشروع اللي هما خدامين فيه. من غير هذوك المشاكل ديال انهم بالنسبه للاسره كيكون صعيب باش توفقي ما بين الدار وما بين العمل، باش خصنا مثلا نكريو المقر ولا ندبروا عليه. يعني المراه ديال العالم القروي كيكون صعيب عليها باش الناس ديال المحيط ديالها، بحيث انه تيكون داك حشومه لا انا داك فلان كنحش منه ولا هذا. المهم بالنسبه للمراه يعني شحال هذا كيف ما قلنا لنا كتكون حشومه ديال الدار ما تخرج وهذا، ولكن الحمد لله ملي كتكون المراه قويه وفارضه الوجود ديالها وفارضه ذاتها اللي كيجعلها انها تصرف على الاسره ديالها، تكون استقلاليه عندها، تشري داكشي اللي بغات، تمشي فين ما بغات. المهم ماشي الفرق كبير، قويه الحمد لله.
Stay with us here on Africa Live. Here's